Gladiator II is out in theaters, sequel to the 2000 classic film that won 5 Oscars, directed once again by Ridley Scott, starring Paul Mescal, Denzel Washington, Pedro Pascal, Connie Nielsen, Joseph Quinn, and Fred Hechinger. The sequel idea has been floating around for years. Apparently, at one point, Scott wanted the movie to be about Maximus being laid down in a grave after the events of the first film and then resurrected after 3 days to continue his adventures, to which Russell Crowe apparently replied that he doesn't think they have the rights to that story, which is a banger joke. A script was then written by Nick Cave, of all people, the musician, and I believe it's available to read online. It's been made public since. I haven't read it, but I've heard that it includes Maximus being either immortal or constantly reincarnated throughout centuries and taking part in various wars, which is pretty nuts if you think about it. In the end, that is, I think, fortunately not what happens in the movie that was made. The story here starts 16 years after the death of Marcus Aurelius. We learn that Rome is now ruled by twin emperors who are decadent, insane, bloodthirsty, and out of touch. And they keep sending Rome's armies to wage useless wars, disregarding the needs of the actual society. In the opening sequence, the naval forces led by General Acacius, played by Pedro Pascal, attack and conquer a city in northern Africa. A city defended by warriors including Paul Mescal's Hanno. Hanno's wife dies in the attack, his city falls, he himself is sold into slavery and gets the attention of a gladiator owner named Macrinus, played by Denzel Washington. He asks Hanno point blank, "What do I need to promise you to make you loyal, to make you fight for me?" And the answer is the general's head, and then off we go from there. Now, I have to say right away, when I saw the news that they are in fact making Gladiator 2, I had the textbook definition of mixed feelings. On the one hand, I'm firmly against the idea, the principle of making sequels, prequels, and remakes of every single successful movie from the past. And Gladiator specifically is one that never needed revisiting, in my opinion. On the other hand, sometimes even in similar cases like this one, it turns out that the sequel is in fact amazing, and examples would include movies like Trainspotting and Blade Runner. So I was very undecided in my expectations, even more so when you consider that Ridley Scott himself has been wildly inconsistent in his recent output. It's a total coin flip with his movies. You can get something amazing like The Martian or The Last Duel, or something horrible like Alien Covenant or Napoleon. So first things first, this is not a bad film. In fact, I found it to be fairly entertaining despite its many flaws. But yes, it does have flaws, quite a number of them in fact, and I think between them and the lack of that certain special spark that was present in the original film, it just never reaches the same heights, and I'm pretty sure it will not be considered an equal classic. So let's start with the good stuff. I liked the action and the spectacle of the film. It does a great job with the arena combat, the large crowd scenes, the vibes of period Rome. In fact, I've read part of the reason for the sequel's existence in the first place was simply Ridley Scott's unused scene ideas from the first movie, such as the rhinoceros fight. They couldn't do it in 2000 because the CGI was too limited, and it's obviously impossible to tame a real rhino. But now with the advancements in tech, we got that. We also got the naval battle in the Colosseum. Pretty cool stuff. I thought the physicality of the fights and the choreography and the stunts, all very well done. I liked Paul Mescal, even if he is somewhat one note here. I loved Denzel. Many people highlighted him as the best part about the film, and I can see why. He enjoys the hell out of his performance and is deeply entertaining on screen. I love the production design, the sets, clothes. A lot of it has a very physical, tactile feel, so great stuff there. And I liked a large part of the plot, mostly the general setup of the 4 main characters. I mean, 5 technically, but I'm gonna count the twin emperors as one guy effectively, because the way they're all established in the first 20 minutes or so is this. Hanno is the straight up good guy protagonist. The emperors are straight up bad guys, villains. But then this is where it gets more interesting. The General Acacius is an honorable man in service of a corrupt system. So essentially a good guy doing bad things. And then Macrinus has his own agenda, his own interests at heart, but because that temporarily aligns with what Hanno wants, he ends up doing things which help him. So, from the perspective of the protagonist, he's a bad guy doing good things. Of course, simplifying here. But what that means is you have this beautiful setup of characters representing different philosophies depending on where they stand, which to me is very reminiscent of especially classic Russian literature, where often characters are vessels for philosophies. Now, as the plot moves forward, I don't think all of its potential gets realized, but I do have to recognize that at least the central idea there is solid. So we've kind of naturally reached the flaws part of the review. I do think that the movie gets progressively less impressive the longer it goes on, and the finale especially is underwhelming, certainly not close to the level of its predecessor. I think there are elements of the plot which are straight nonsense, such as Lucilla visiting Hanno in prison, when she herself is at the time imprisoned, or Hanno riding out to his final confrontation without being stopped by any of the thousands of Praetorians that he has to pass. I think the plot twist is sort of obvious, and you could have just started revealing that piece of information instead of making a big deal about it in the middle. In general, this ties into that. I think the introduction of Hanno is egregious in the opening sequence because it's so contrived. We just see him kissing his wife, and then she dies 3 minutes later, and that's essentially all we learn about his character. He loves his wife, and he's a warrior. That's it. And I think, as much as I like Mescal, you have to admit he doesn't have the same gravitas and charisma that Russell Crowe did. I think the score is not as phenomenal as the Hans Zimmer one from the original, and I think the CGI in some sequences looks bad, most notably in the baboon fight, which is just ridiculous. I mean, the baboons look like mutants or Pokemon, and apparently the effects team also thought so, but Scott was like, no, guys. I once met a baboon with alopecia, without his hair, and this is what they look like, so in the movie, they all have alopecia as well. Mate, what are you talking about? That is bonkers. So, yeah, there are some problematic things in here, but end of the day, it is a fairly enjoyable cinematic experience, especially on the big screen. But also at the end of the day, I feel you need to ask yourself, was it worth it to touch the Gladiator name for an okay movie like this one? Or should we let legends be, unless we really have something new and fresh and interesting to add? Because I felt this sequel doesn't really have that. It doesn't justify itself enough. And so, at the end of the day, despite not being a bad movie, it is a disappointing one.